Lapa.
Oh.
It's about 32 around there, hovering.
Well, that's not bad for there.
Lapa. How are you? Good to see you.
Okay,
See? But you remember.
let's start.
Oh, it's Canada.
Good. It was good.
All right.
You should know your daughter's there.
Gentlemen,
Especially
what page we read?
We are in 85.
84. Oh, we're getting there.
Yeah.
Slowly.
Yeah, 6 more months. It's a paragraph.
Okay. What a firm foundation, that's where we are, or beginning? Christians.
One demonstration of the excellent character of the Christians in those days was their dedication to charity and all good works, and the fact that they founded hospitals and philanthropic institutions. For example, the first person to establish public clinics throughout the Roman Empire were the poor. The injured and the helpless received medical care was the Emperor Constantine. This great king was the first Roman ruler to champion the cause of Christ. He spared no efforts, dedicating his life to the promotion of the principles of the gospel, and he solidly established the Roman government, which in reality had been nothing but a system of unrelieved oppression on moderation and justice. His blessed name shines out across the dawn of history like the morning star, and his rank and fame amongst the world's noblest and most highly civilized is still on the tongues of Christians of all denominations. What a firm foundation of excellent character was laid down in those days, thanks to the training of the holy souls who arose to promote the teachings of the gospel. How many primary schools, colleges, hospitals were established, and institutions where fatherless and indigent children received their education? How many were the individuals who sacrificed their own personal advantages and, out of the desire to please the Lord, devoted the days of their lives to teaching the masses?
Right, this is what does jump at you in this 2 paragraphs we read. It's just intriguing that even the system of charity and distribution of the message of Christ was done through the poor, which is very intriguing.
And service.
Right, but
Service.
the cause of it was love of God, but the key was they didn't say that rich people or government established the institutions. The institutions were created by the poor, which is very intriguing. And this is the whole point from perspective of the sacrifices, that normally poor people are more attuned in terms of providing service than people that have power and means to even make it happen. But here it says, establishing public clinics throughout the Roman Empire were the poor.
Which is the Constantine, the
I
emperor.
think he's actually commenting on Constantine, how he transformed this Roman Empire.
Right, but
Took care of the poor so he could elevate the poor.
no, generally, yeah, the question was how did Christianity, for example, dissipate throughout the world? Even Islam, how did Islam dissipate throughout the world?
Service to the poor.
Right. No, initially it's true, but the Sufis and dervishes, they were giving away their wealth, and they were traveling throughout the land, propagating Islamic doctrine. That's how Islam spread throughout the world. The question is, the Christians also, when you look at the orders, Jesuit orders, that last 300-400 years, they spread around the world and lived with the poor, especially you look at India, for example, even China. They went there. So it was sacrifices of individuals, and most of them didn't have any assets. So that's how and why did they do this? Wasn't because of the material gain. It was for love of God. So question, now if we engage, bless you.
Thank you.
So how does Baha'i religion want to take advantage of this, and how can you create the spirit of faith for normal people to do same thing Christians or Muslims, Sufis did, to propagate the religion?
But Christianity didn't even really get anywhere until Constantine got a hold of it, right? I mean, the first 300 years it had no visibility.
Of course, the progress was slow. The question is that was institutionalized.
So it took a king to bring it
Right.
to light.
But that's not how it spread. No,
Did it have any-
Christianity up to about 300-400 years ago, the breadth of the land occupied by Christian was 1/3 of the land that was occupied by Muslims.
Up to 300 years ago.
Right. And what ended up happening is the last few hundred years, I don't know exactly the time, is that these missionaries that went around the world completely changed by creating basically clinics, schools, even let's say bathhouses and so on and so forth. They were creating service to basically save the poor and uneducated, and that's how they attracted in Christianity spread.
This
any
is
other?
also, I think this is also building on the prior section where we were talking about Galen and how Galen, who was the foremost philosopher, and philosophy was really religion at that point, right, mainstream, how impressed he was with the Christians and their character and their actions and their detachment. And then this is, I think these paragraphs are more talking about some of the practical, pragmatic applications of their excellent character, not just they were really nice people, they actually did stuff,
Right.
right?
Well, the whole point was that when you're looking, for example, we were talking about Constantine, that brought Christianity as part of the state's religion. They did more damage than anybody else because they started to basically attack other churches, like Jainism. Sorry?
Big
So
damage to
clergy
what?
became political.
Essence of the Christianity, because if they
The
forced
damage
it,
to Christianity, you mean?
right? Although they were spreading it by force, by replacing, for example, Jainism, and they destroyed all the same thing happened in Islamic doctrine as well, and still happening in some places. The key is just when the state gets the power of religion and try to enforce it, it causes harm. And we see why. It causes harm. But the key is that, so spread of Christianity or spread of Islam wasn't through force. And people that spread it were basically ordinary people without organized type of state to propagate the religion. And here we see a good example of it, that current government of Iran is trying to institutionalize Shia Islam and export it, and they failed everywhere because it doesn't work. So the whole key of propagation of word of God comes through love of God, and it is done by ordinary people. That's the whole key. So if you want to be successful, we need to do the same thing. You need to provide education, healthcare. It was interesting, actually. Yesterday, it wasn't enough time to go through the life of Mr. Naqshbandi, but it was very interesting the way he lived his life and the detachment that he had for material things. I've never seen this, and there was no malice. I haven't seen this. There was no malice in this person, and he would accept anybody's behavior and try to bring them to the right path, which is interesting. But the thing that was, if you listen to his talks also, the concept of, right now we say, what is your profession? We say, well, I'm a programmer, I'm a teacher, I'm a colloquial teacher, I am, let's say, a carpenter, and so on and so forth. But that's your job. He was saying that people should have a job of a spiritual teacher, and to fund it, they can work. And this concept doesn't exist, or it's not in people's mind, because the first thing that we think is that, well, I have to make a living first, and I have to run my family. Then if I have any time, I can dedicate it or donate toward, but his perception of especially youth was that you should select to be a spiritual teacher, because that's the most impact you can have in your life in terms of.
Would that not be a missionary?
Not
They're
necessarily.
different.
Yeah.
They're different. You can be a spiritual teacher in your own place that you live. You don't have to go somewhere else to do it. I think you mentioned it last week or 2 weeks ago about, people not going and staying where they are and helping where they are. And it's that same principle. It doesn't matter where you are, if you are keying in on the people around you that need to learn, who want to learn, but learn in their own way, you find how do they learn. You teach them.
No, I think we're missing missionary in a sense that you're paid to do a job is different.
Well, that's
It's
what
an
I'm getting at.
ecclesiastical structure is not, but he was saying something different.
That's what I'm not
And ironically, this was the same during Abdul Baha's time. That means that people that had jobs, they had stores, they were saying, they were close everything, cash everything, take the money, go someplace else, and their main job was, and they would sell anything, just to go by.
Make a living so they can teach.
Right,
Like
so
the
they can
Sufis.
teach.
Like this.
You itself.
No,
you're
Sufis
working
weren't working at all. Sufis were completely different. So Sufis were storytellers. That's how they would go from one one place to the other, begging basically, and how they spread. That's where they had they were storytellers, and they would go from tea houses to
Does
tea
that work
houses.
today? Does that
Sorry?
really work today? Baba
No.
Baba Hamilton Badiga. Baba Hamilton. His first priority was faith, and then the family, and then maybe work.
Yeah,
But it
they're
doesn't work today. It just
not
doesn't fit the model
necessarily, but
today.
you can mix things together. But what I'm saying is that's how these things, what we're reading is that's how it worked. The question really goes back of, people, actually, the Azizis, for example, these guys were basically quite well off. And what they did is they went into Iraq, selling needles and threads in their head, and they couldn't speak Arabic either. Just because they were told to go. Now, what I'm just referring to is that this idea that you take spiritual teaching as your primary job.
It's,
It's-
it's the same, same expression it said that you eat to live, you don't live to
Yeah.
eat. So it's, I think he has.
Yeah, but
more or
the
less
whole
same-
point was,
The point is not
to take
eat
profession as profession. I am a spiritual teacher.
Why does this seem so novel? I really don't get it.
Sorry,
Let me give
Why
you
is
an
this
example.
concept so novel?
because nobody's following it. We don't have anybody that is doing this. At least I don't know of any.
Well, the
I
principle
do,
is,
yeah.
well, I mean, aren't you doing it?
I try. But I have an illustration. A friend of mine used to be the secretary and assistant for Hand of the Cause, Mr. Kadem, up in Wilmette when he had his office up there. And they were in the office one day, feeling a little funny, telling stories with each other, and she blurted out to this Hand of the Cause, "Mr. Kadem, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And as soon as she said that, she said, "Oh my God, did I just say that to a Hand of the Cause of God?" But he pondered that for just a second, and he says, "I'd like to be a scattering angel." You know that passage in the front of the prayer book? And intone, O my servant, the verses of God, that the scattering angels will scatter abroad the fragrances. So that was his job, to be a scattering angel, to scatter the fragrances around. So we had a few here on that.
Sure.
I'd like to ask a question. Since I'm a new Baha'i, what is the hand of the cause?
Sure.
I have no idea
Yeah.
what that is.
Hand of the Cause was a title that was assigned to people that dedicated their lives. During Baha'u'llah's, these were basically specific spiritual teachers that knew the essence of the Baha'i religion and were assigned to propagate the faith and to do protection. Because at the time, there was no universal house of justice. So Hands of the Cause were, again, selected individuals that were deepened in the religion itself and dedicated themselves to the cause.
Selected by
But with
whom?
no authority.
For Baha'u'llah, then Abdul Baha assigned few, and I think Shoghi Effendi did few also.
That's important, who signed it.
Right.
Yeah.
Then when
That was my
Shoghi,
next
Now House
question.
of Justice is doing
And they
now?
had no authority.
no, there is no Hands of the Cause anymore.
Uncles and aunts.
It was for propagation, protection, and basically interpretation of the text. When
I
and
didn't
this,
really hear what you just said. I'm sorry.
sorry,
I was trying to hear you. I didn't hear you what you said.
it was for protection of the faith, propagation of the faith, and interpretation of the text. Because remember, many of
No interpretation.
no, I mean the propagation of the text itself. Because
Rules of engagement.
there was no, I mean, during Bob's time, there was no printed anything.
The Farsi word for this?
Sorry?
What's the Farsi word for this? Hand of the cause.
Hand of the cause, Ayadiya Amrullah. Right. So the whole process was that they would most learned of the people and most deepened, and then they were basically propagating the faith, but they had access to the text and they would repeat it basically for everybody. But
So was it
initially,
similar like being a priest then?
No.
not really a
Advisory
priest.
role.
Yeah.
And they advised also through their actions. So for example, there's this guy who's also Henry Cause, Muhajir. He went to an island of people that you would normally not think, they don't, they live very simply. They live very simply. They didn't have technology like we have here. They didn't have clothing like we have here. It was very, very down to earth, simple as you can get. And he went there as a doctor. He helped them. Through his example of who he was, they practically saw him as the person who they look up to. And then through his example of being a Baha'i, they actually wanted to believe as he did, so they became all Baha'is, And Shoghi Effendi accepted that. Even though they didn't even know who Baha'u'llah really was or anything about that, Shoghi Effendi still accepted that as becoming a Baha'i. So, for example, these instances where you have Hands of the Cause, where they actually do stuff in action and you see what they've done, and the response by the World Center, being Shoghi Effendi or Abdul Baha or Baha'u'llah at the time, you're able to see how the Baha'i faith is in action. So it's not a judgment of what you have in your mind, it's a judgment of what you have in your heart. And that's all that matters. The sphere of influence that you enter into, it's like you enter into the gravity well of the sun. Okay, you're receiving its light, you're affected by it, you warm up eventually, you grow more and more and more, and eventually you may turn into one yourself.
But this doesn't mean that they were infallible. See, these were basically, some of them went astray as well. But the key really was that they were the most knowledgeable about the faith, and they were custodian, basically. And this was a transitory step, right, within the Baha'i religion. And remember, Baha'is were attacked from all sides at the time. And most of the leaders of religion were prisoned, and they were incarcerated. So
You know, the whole point of this book is talking about the spiritually learned, those really knowledgeable people, but those people who also had the spirit underneath this knowledge. And I think the Hands of the Cause really exemplified the whole point of this book. Now, according to the will and testament of Abdul Baha, only the guardian had the right to appoint a Hand of the Cause. So the total that we had
27.
was, well, I think it was a little more than that, maybe, but 30 or 40, I don't think more than 40. But the function of protection and propagation, those functions have now passed to the International Teaching Center and to the international counselors and to the boards of counselors around the world that are appointed by the House of Justice. So the functions are carrying on. And so you might say that the present day international and continental counselors are sort of a mirror of the Hands of the Cause of God.
well, conditions have changed as well, so it's not the same as before. Okay, let's read on.
When, however, the time approached for the effulgent beauty of Muhammad to draw upon the world, control of Christian affairs passed into the hands of ignorant priests. Those heavenly breezes soft flowing into the regions of divine grace died away, and the laws of great evangel and rock foundations on which the civilization of the world was based turned barren of result. This out of misuse and because of the conduct of persons who seemingly fair were yet inwardly foul. The noted historians of Europe, in describing the conditions, manners, politics, learning, and culture in all their aspects of early medieval and modern times, unanimously record that during the 10 centuries constituting the Middle Ages, from the beginning of the 6th century of the Christian era till the end of the 15th, Europe was in every respect and to an extreme degree barbaric and dark. The principal cause of this was that the monks referred to by European people as spiritual and religious leaders had given up the abiding glory that comes from the obedience of the sacred commandments and heavenly teachings of the gospel, had joined forces with the presumptuous and tyrannical rulers of the temporal governments of those times. They had turned their eyes away from the everlasting glory and were devoting all their efforts to the furtherance of their mutual worldly interests, and passing imperishable advantages. Ultimately, things reached a point where the masses were hopelessly prisoners in the hands of these two groups, and all this brought down in ruins the whole structure of the religion, culture, welfare, and civilization of the peoples of Europe.
Yeah. So you clearly see that the reason Christians didn't accept the message of Muhammad was because of the ecclesiastical structure that had gone astray and basically merged with the political system to rob the common man. And this is why Europeans call that era of basically 7th century to 15th century, when Renaissance started to occur, the Dark Ages.
Prior to the Renaissance.
Right. But the whole key is that what happened? It means that the priests and kings colluded. And they say, God of earth and God of heaven says you do this. So either way, if you do against what we say, you're not going to exist. And that's why Inquisition occurred, all sorts of the wars trying to crusades started. All these things had a material source because they thought Holy Land has all the golds of Arabs are in Holy Land, and they were trying to liberate the gold, not liberate the land. So they created these crusades and so on and so forth. So we have a history of seeing when the ecclesiastical structure colludes with the political system, what the result is. And guess what? Still today, people are trying to make it work. And this is history of mankind shows it never worked. So, and we see during the Qajar dynasty in Iran, you saw the collusion even disintegrated the Persian Empire, and they lost land to Russia and so on and so forth because of incompetence and meddling of clergy into the politics that they're not supposed to do. So this process has continued, and that is one of the major reasons in Baha'i religion we don't have ecclesiastical structure or priests and hierarchy of priests. Everything is through elected individual. So this process would never mix with the political system.
The biggest, just an interruption, I'm sorry.
Sure.
The biggest theme here that has gone over and over, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, Islam, is that the revelation to faith, and when it's being applied in its pure form, like with the Constantine times, this is the true revelation. The problem is it's the most powerful tool on the planet to manipulate people and create control, power, and wealth.
Sure.
So corrupt people infiltrate it. I don't know how else to say this. They were talking about the monks, for example. And then after, again, and this happens over generations, doesn't happen in 1 week, right? We're talking
Right.
about a couple hundred years. They pervert the message and manipulate the message to control the masses of people. And when you have multiple generations over 100, 150 years of people hearing twisted teachings because nothing is written down, that becomes the new reality, and then it becomes this tool that, again, becomes the Dark Ages. What's beautiful about today is that with the Baha'i writings, everything is written, documented, so on and so forth. It's actually impossible for this corruption to happen again because there are safeguards placed so that there can't be, dynamic, charismatic figures that people follow because, oh, this person, we're going to follow Joe Smith because he's a really great Baha'i. No, you follow the faith. So it's a very big separation, However, that same recurrent theme of blossoming, manifesting the teachings, schools, education, science, has happened with every revelation. This revelation, obviously, it's exponentially more if you look at the technology and awareness and so on and so forth, but it's an even more powerful fire that could destroy the planet unless this ability for humanity or man to corrupt it wasn't actually addressed.
Well, the whole process that didn't exist in the prior religions, and for a right reason, is Universal House of Justice. You have an institution that basically corrects the application of the laws. So if something, it's self-correcting mechanism is built into it. So this cannot get corrupted as the other one.
Just put this out there. So what's really cool about the Baha'i faith, which really just gives me goosebumps, is how young it is. You know, in 1917, 1920, 1937, 1950s, there was literally a human being, a spiritual human being, Abdul Baha Shoghi Effendi, who was in charge. When the guardian Shoghi Effendi passed away till 1963, nobody was in charge. The Hands of the Cause had to literally hold the whole Baha'i world together under, the guidance
So when
of
did the
teacher.
Universal House of Justice start?
1963.
After passing of Shoghi Effendi
But it was,
in 57.
it was 6 years after the guardian passed away.
Right.
So it's very interesting. So this is how, I was born in 1966, so it's kind of interesting that this is all in our lifetime, that this has all happened. And a lot of these people that talk about the Hands of the Cause, the wife of the guardian, I've seen them, I met them, I grew up with them. It's bizarre, because these are people that are going to be known in the Baha'i history books for generations to come. And we're still living in that coming out of our shell, because that's how young.
We're still like a seed, right?
Right.
Just a little
Poking out.
sprout,
But you see,
just like a little sprout.
we can't
But it's
compare.
very interesting. It puts
Yeah.
things into perspective.
Tell them what 1992. What
Right.
we did in 1992.
But reality is, in terms of Baha'i religion, the revelation itself, the time that it was basically came through Baha'u'llah, it's almost 1,000 years after the last Imam passed away, 1,000 years. So when you look at the socio-economic system at the time, it's intriguing actually that through the few texts that was the Quranic document, how they developed the jurisprudence to control society, because there was no blueprint of society at the time. So they invented all these infrastructure of the political systems that didn't exist at the time. During Muhammad's time, city-states were the dominant model in the world. When Muhammad came in, and they developed this process of empires of for example, Islamic empire, but which was greatly influenced by Persians that seeped into their political system and developed that process generally. But the point of conversation is that majority of the development of the jurisprudence, legal systems, judicial systems, ethical systems were developed by learned people of the Islamic doctrine. So this was developed after Muhammad passed on. And of course, when you looked at conditions, socioeconomic of condition of humanity up to 1844, per capita income of the world citizen were less than $2. a day. The 93% of population couldn't read or write. Average age of a population, mean of basically life expectancy was in 40s. So when we sit here and we talk about other religion, we think that they were in the same condition we are, and they were doing some crazy things at the time, which is the tools, for example, judicial system, when they were saying that if somebody steals, you have to cut his finger or hand or this or that, was because there was no jail system. And this was actually an improvement to what they were doing before. Is that because whoever had the power had the law and would execute the guy. So you came from a no law, anything goes system to a basically judicial system that had remedies and had so on and so forth that were developed at the time. Now you're coming to a mode, and this is the most difficult thing to, when you say Baha'i religion to a Christian, they still think that you're in the same level of revelation as Christianity or Islam. Now you're dealing with new revelation that actually gave us the blueprint of the new society, which is completely unheard of. There is no religion on earth except Baha'i religion that has given us the blueprint in writing. They've given us, I mean, this is a good example of it, how a political system should operate. This is the book. Now, this revelation occurred, and if you look at 1844, when this revelation occurred, the humanity started to shoot up from education, from healthcare, from life expectancy, from level of poverty, from population, right? Now, how did this happen? But this problem regarding overpopulation didn't exist at the time of Muhammad. At most, they say between 800 million people at the time of Muhammad. At the time of Jesus, there were only 200 million people in the whole earth. That's about maybe a corner of China right now. A few cities in China have 200 million people. So you can't compare rural and regulations that existed at the time with the sparse population that could barely feed itself. People were dying from hunger. A disease would come in, or a war. It was similar to the men would die and people would starve because there was nobody to plant.
Even in the 1900s, this country, United States of America, they would institute martial law when there was an influenza outbreak.
Because there were no
quarantine,
right.
And
right.
people would die in droves. Like in St. Petersburg, they did it. This is 1900. St. Petersburg was founded. So
yeah, actually, it's good to see the impact of bacteria and viruses in the population of the world. And you're talking about 1800s, right? In Iran.
No, 1900s. I brought up the 1900s.
No, I understand, but in 1800, this is Baha'i revelation were in full display at the time, and Abdul Baha was telling people, do not drink the water. You have to boil the water and drink it because of cholera. And Muslim clergy said, well, no, if it's, Muhammad said, if body of water is more than 3 paces from each side large, it's clean. So this is the Quranic thing, and no, anybody that says anything else, guess what happened? 30% of population of Iran got wiped out because of cholera. So now you're not talking about, now we see the application and implication of the revelation in terms of harnessing the power of industrialization. How did the same way Muhammad developed, for example, individual ownership of land? You know, God comes down, if you have a license, have basically a piece of paper that says this land belongs to you or your family, nobody can take it away from you. This didn't exist. Even in Iran, during, for example, kingdoms, all these ideas was disturbed completely. They were doing whatever they wanted. So the Islam almost died because of their violating Islamic laws that created the Islamic civilization were not adhered to. So same way that Muhammad gave identity to women, which they didn't have any before. Although he wasn't equal to men, but right. But it was a revolution, or the issue of breaking caste systems. There is no definition of caste system in Islamic doctrine. And that's why Islam propagated after Muhammad through the Sufis and bringing these ideology, and people were embracing it because it would solve their problem. Now, same thing is happening in Baha'u'llah in an exponential form. When you're looking at prejudice against race, prejudice against age, prejudice against, for example, laws of child labor, women, equality of men and women, ability to women vote. It's only maybe less than 100 years that in the bastion of Western culture, a woman can vote in this country. In 1960s, 60s, you still had a black water fountain and a white water fountain in the South.
The last county to stop desegregation, to desegregate all the schools, was Pinellas.
That was the last one.
Yeah, in the whole country. This place here.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I moved
Desegregation of
to
schools.
Pompano Beach in 69, 70, they were still separate water fountains, separate schools, everything.
Separate churches. They wouldn't allow black people in white churches. So question right now is that now that you see child labor law, it's only 19, it was
What about women
Dr.
driving?
Wright that, sorry?
Women driving in Saudi Arabia just happened.
Well, that's right. Yeah. But no, the point I'm trying to make, when you look at the application of laws, Holy Spirit that came in, fueled this basically material civilization growth because it broke the chains. If, for example, child labor wasn't modified in the Western societies, which they took it from by religion, the society today would be the gross national product of countries would be 1/100 of what it is now. The wealth would be concentrated on few oligarch, and everybody else would be a normal slave to them. But these are the key elements that the Holy Spirit comes in before the problem occurs and provides a solution for basically advance of both material civilization and the spiritual civilization. So we can't compare the Baha'i doctrine, the revelation of Baha'i doctrine that is getting implemented, every single line of it is getting implemented someplace in the world because geniuses discovered that this would help them to solve their problem. So you see the breadth of the Holy Spirit and how influential it is in terms of daily lives of humanity. And guess what? Like anything else, you have a closed system. If you go against it, you're going to harm yourself and you're going to harm people around it. So if government of, for example, Iran is trying to push ideology through force, where Baha'u'llah mentioned that you cannot, under no circumstances, you cannot diffuse or force somebody to accept your ideology. What are they doing is opposite of that. What happens? Their society deteriorates. Their spirit is slowly would disintegrate. They're hollowing from inside. No other event in the history of mankind could have destroyed Shia Islam except them violating this law. They violated it and they're seeing the consequences. Now, no one believes in Shia Islam anymore, in Iran at least. And the ones that do pretend to do it because they have benefits from it. That's the only reason. So you see that this closed system, if you abuse it or you go against the Holy Spirit, there are consequences. And it's not God's hand that is coming and punishing Persians today. It's their own doing, it's their own belief, their own violation of the Holy Spirit that is causing that anomaly to occur. Now, so this elimination of prejudice against religion, everywhere that you see that this law is violated, you see strife, you see people are getting harmed. Muslims are against Christians, Christians are against Muslims, right? Why? Because neither of them believe in that the ideology of the other one is they can accept that can exist, and you cannot force your ideology to another person. So you see the violation of those laws creates strife, and you see it all over the world. And the good thing about humanity is that we can trace of every malice that we have done on earth never would get erased. Those days that you cause problems and you can change the reality because you're the victor is gone. Something happens in China in a village, 2 hours later it's on YouTube and everybody sees it. So you can't hide anything either. And Shoghi Effendi mentioned during his life, toward, I think it was early 50s, that he mentioned that method of the communication of every individual being able to communicate with every other individual across the earth would be invented.
1934.
It was 34? Yeah. So he predicted that the internet would be created. And this propagation of information would be instantaneous. This is what his words are. So question really goes back so we shouldn't look down on other religious doctrines, not adherents of the religion. So there is nothing wrong with Christianity or Muslim religion. The problem is that they were designed, a segment which is really the human interaction and jurisprudence was designed for the time that they were revealed and were altered by adherents of that religion. And nothing to do with Bible, for example. Dark Ages wasn't caused by Christianity. Dark Ages were caused by people that altered Christianity.
They weren't following the teaching.
Exactly. That's the whole point.
But that's always the case that happens when you have the winter of that religion.
Right. So laws of entropy, any system like religion dies. It consumes its internal energy, dies like anything else. So this is really the key. But when you're looking at, and this is very hard to propagate, that Baha'i religion is not something like Christianity or like Muslim religion that has to be developed from a jurisprudence and application of it in the society. It's given to us. And this is very difficult for a Christian that looks at Baha'i religion or Muslim looks at Baha'i religion or Sufis or whoever it is, to even comprehend that such a thing even can exist. Because they tell you that you have a philosophy like any other philosophies. And then the jurisprudence, the human behavior, the laws has to be extrapolated by the learned people to create a new civilization or new society. Well, this is not true.
But that's the whole self-destruct function of it, though. If you see in the epistemology class, any philosophy class that you go to where they question what is knowledge, that's what it all comes back to, what Gilbert just mentioned right now. The idea that it's a body of knowledge that's built by a learned few that go over time to make it more acclimated for the time of the age. And it's foolish because ultimately speaking, it's a self-destruct function from the very beginning, because you've just admitted that it's made by people.
Well, that's the whole point. So the question right now, and the way you do it scientifically is you look at the outcome. You see? You see the laws and you see whether it was from the Holy Spirit, which is synonymous to the writings of the New Manifestation or Baha'i writings, and see is that law, application of that law, solves the problem or causes problem. It was interesting. They did an interview from a mosque. Majority of people, these were people that were practicing Islam. When they came out, right, they were interviewing them. Do you think that Sharia law supersedes the Constitution of the United States? And do you think that should be and majority
Yes.
of them were saying, look, this is God's law. Sharia is a God's law.
So yes.
Sharia is not God's law. So when you believe in something that is wrong, it's very hard to change it. Sharia was invented by those learned people trying to find ways of dealing with the human interaction of the time of Muhammad. They created this jurisprudence. How could you apply that is not from God and apply it today? It's not possible. So question really goes back of who put this idea in the heads of those Muslim adherents that Sharia is God's law.
The clergy.
Exactly.
Hundreds of years. And it becomes theirs when you hear something after 50 generations.
That's right.
It's normal, but it's not accurate. And it's exactly what the first couple paragraphs that I read and that we read, which was the demonstration of excellent character of Christians and the schools and all that. And then boom, the monks took over and destroyed everything.
Right.
And they rewrote everything so that they could use the power of the religion to manipulate people. Period.
Well, maybe you're right, but at the same time, the very fundamental premise of the Baha'i religion is that the antiquated teachings of the past are no longer applicable. So if someone were to put all the effort and time and energy into actually reading those books rather than listening to the clergyman, they'll see that those books are outdated in of themselves, as in you can't actually apply them now.
But which books are you talking about?
The spiritual books themselves, that is
But
from
this
God.
is the whole point. If you read the Quran in its context, it doesn't say anything about what these guys are doing.
It doesn't, but the
That's
point,
what I was
the
trying
point of
to
what I'm
say.
saying is when someone reads the Quran and they see what the Quran says, for example, the value of a woman, okay? Modern day, we're not going to accept this because the Holy Spirit is otherwise. Men and women are both
No,
aren't
of
the
course,
same.
of course.
And so on this premise, I'm saying if someone were to read the Quran and see what it is, even though it was for that time, but apply it today, they won't be able to do so. So the very premise that, you know, you have all these learned scholars and all these things, it's easier, it's an opiate for someone to not read the actual text and come to the realization that what they believe is wrong than to go and just listen to somebody. Because if you realize
Yeah, but-
it's
okay.
wrong, you're not going to believe in that religion
Why
anymore.
do you think, and this is the whole point, why do you think this issue regarding elimination of prejudices, child labor, equality of men and women, all these ideologies that was dissipated by Baha'i religion in the world today. You can't go to a non-zealot religious person that would say anything wrong with what these laws are, right? But what makes that person, you see, this is the whole point. What makes that person to say, Baha'i doctrine is good, but I can adapt it and still be Muslim? You see,
I haven't really
How
heard
do
that
you think-
personally.
but that's the whole point.
No, but they're doing it.
That's the
if
whole
you believe
point.
in the equality of men and women, you're actually not a true Christian, because the Bible does not talk about the equality of women. A woman is subservient to a man.
But they don't practice Christianity. They're
That's
not
the
practicing
point. The
it.
point is that they're adapting.
But they're not reading the book.
But you see, that's the whole
They're
point.
adapting,
Why,
and they're reading
why,
it, they're making it up
Yeah.
based on the revelation of Baha'u'llah.
Well, the Baha'i writings talk about the spread of irreligion. And the way I've interpreted this myself in my own life, and I like to know I'm wrong or right based on what I've understood, is that this irreligion, the spread of irreligion, is the cause for the destruction of all these things that are going on around us.
well,
And
why
further-
do you think irreligion is becoming more prominent than religious people?
Because if they go and they read the book that they believe in, they're going to come to an existential crisis. Once they hit that existential crisis,
That's
that
right.
there's an expiration on my carton of milk that I have in my hand. Maybe I should go buy another carton of milk that's updated for today. They come and realize there's an expiration date.
But this is the whole point. You see, the key really is that there are two groups. There are people that have been Muslims in their generations for 1,000 years, and it's very difficult for them to accept that their forefathers were wrong. Right? So at least for last 200 years. So question really goes back of why do you think the Muslim scholars, remember, the scholars of a religion, they're not idiots. The majority of them are very cognizant of what's good or what bad. So they have a conscience. The problem they're facing is that they say that I can make Muslim look like a Baha'i religion. I don't need to change my religion. And they go tear themselves apart, try to find this solution that was given by Baha'i religion inside Quran. So they try to interpret it to pull that out. But nobody believes in what they say. So that's where the transition problem occurs. That they cannot accept that their religion is terminated. This is the problem. Now, Jews have accepted this, majority of them, that their religion is not an static religion. That's why they're most progressive in religious form and application of new jurisprudence in the world, because they follow Baha'i religion. Not because they believe in Baha'i religion, because it works. It helps them to solve their problem. And they don't have any prejudice because they develop that they say religion is a culture that is exercised and has to change continuously by this development of new ideology that comes from humanity. They don't care whether it came from Baha'u'llah. They care is that, look, this is the new practice, this is new ethics, and we need to adopt the new ethics. They still stay culturally Jewish, but religious-wise, they're not Jewish. So this is really the contrast that is occurring today.
Don't you see that? Something that I've seen with especially Israel, they have laws allowing Jewish people to study the text, the holy text, and make that their work. They actually have that where you're able to sit at home,
Yeah.
have many children, and read your text and so on. So I'm seeing a demographic shift in terms of those who are Jewish. Those that you describe, there are some people who, they don't have that many children. They may have one or two, most probably. And then you have, if at all, and then you have this population of people who are very, 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 I can't even say, they're extremists, just as you have in
Hasidic Jews, right.
Islam.
Right.
Yeah, Hasidic Jews, those people, and then Orthodox Jews as well,
Right.
and all these other. If they're the same thing, I'm not aware. But my point is that you have a lot of this going on, and this influence is growing day by day. You know, person by person who's created.
But it's not dominant. It would stay isolated.
It's the
Yeah.
press.
It's not
still
possible.
like
Yeah.
a teeny tiny percentage
Right.
of Jews. I mean, it's like the Reformed Jews that are the mainstream Jews relative to those Orthodox Hasidic Jews. It's
Yeah, majority of them are
teeny.
actually agnostic. Majority of Jews, they say God was a watchmaker, they created this world, and just he's watching and laughing at us. That's majority of Jews believe. They say, look, where was God when 6 million Jews were perished? That's why they became agnostic. So these are really key elements, and it's our failure generally as Baha'is to be able to identify and show the revelation itself is the cause of the advancement in the Western civilization, not Aristotle, not Christ, not Muhammad. They're mimicking, they're using revelation of Baha'u'llah to solve their problems. So these are the key elements which obviously we're not doing a good job. And we need to break this barrier in terms of being able to convey the whole picture and tell them why they don't believe any religion would have any impact in their lives. Because they think the limited scope that Christ brought or Muhammad brought in, Baha'i religion is similar ideology that people have to define the jurisprudence and application of or definition of laws. They don't understand it's given to us. This is the first time in history of mankind is given to us. We just need to apply it. And look at what happened. In Iran, it was most dilapidated, the most backroad, most darkest place on earth of what clergy were doing at the time in Iran, and Baha'is that were mostly learned Muslim scholars that adhere to that religion changed overnight. So you can change even people in the most dilapidated place on earth, similar like Muhammad, where he came into a place where basically people were praying to statues. It wasn't monotheistic, and you could change those people to create an Islamic civilization. Now we're creating Baha'i civilization. People are moving toward Baha'i civilization, and they don't understand where it came from. And that's really the key, the shortcoming we have, that we cannot express to them. When you define a religion, what you know of a religion is different than what Baha'i religion is. And this is really the whole key, that they think they invented. For example, League of Nations was invented by Woodrow Wilson, or United Nations were invented by people out of necessity. They came up and created this United Nations. Which in reality, this was revealed by Baha'u'llah. So this is the only solution. First of all, you have to put armament aside, which they didn't take his advice. What happened? The First World War occurred.
This is what Baha'i knows. Other people believe in the same thing?
No, it's not the issue of whether believe or not. The question is that, you see, it's like a closed system, like a formula. You see, if the formula, you say, if you put these parameters in there, you're always going to get the same result. If you have armament, everybody arms to the teeth, eventually a spark is going to blow it up. And that's exactly what happened. Now, how did Baha'i religion influence the process? Baha'u'llah wrote letters to all the kings and emperors and of the time and told them exactly how they should basically look at mankind as one unit. that how they should collaborate, how they should reduce armament. Nobody paid attention to the letters that, was it Dostoevsky or what was the,
Tsar Alexander II?
Yeah, that was it.
Dostoevsky, yeah. He actually wrote in his books that says that the key to the peace of the humanity is in the hands
Oh,
of
Tolstoy?
Tolstoy, right, Tolstoy, right, Tolstoy.
Yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
I know the story.
Leonid Tolstoy. So the key to the peace of the world is in the hands of a prisoner in Akka.
Wow. Yeah,
They cited that in the Prisoner of Akka, the video.
Right.
Yeah.
So you see, and this is the whole point. When you're looking at even ills of the society that we have in the Western culture, you have epidemic, opiate epidemic. You have
Yeah, Leo Tolstoy.
abortion. You have gun control. You have all sorts of different malady that is byproduct of violation of the Holy Spirit. All you have to do is show them, say, look, if you do this, this is the outcome. If you polarize, what did we read here? Abdul Baha says, this is 150 years ago, he said that when elected official from any party goes to this parliament, they should disassociate their identity to the party that they were in. And there they become an institution that collaborates and does the best thing for all the population. United States Congress is violating this. They say, no, I have to vote, although I know my vote is wrong, I should do the right thing, but I vote because my party said so. So they're violating the Holy Spirit. When they violate, they have consequences. And you see the consequences here. Divisiveness. And everybody says, if I had the control, all the control, then, and this is what they're selling to Americans, which is very intriguing. If you all become, if all the power is in my hand, then you won't have those type of problems. The other group says the same thing. If you give me all the power, then I'll do good to you.
It's not just that, they're openly using foul language as well to support their points.
No, of course.
And that's completely
That's why we shouldn't get engaged in politics. Thank you very much.